Story 1. What do you do for a living? It happened at a restaurant. I was their server. Story 2. I was showing a friend a telescope and pointing out all the constellations and planets I knew. He legitimately asked, "Where's Earth?" Story 3. Someone asked me to repeat the pronunciation of my last name and followed it up with, "Are you sure?" Story 4. Can you turn him so we do not see the scratch on his cheek? She asked as we reviewed her son's portrait photographs. No, madam. It is a picture. You should have asked while we were in the camera room. Story 5. The girlfriend of my brother-in-law was amazed that I had 2 brothers and no sisters. She asked how that was possible because she believed humans gave birth in an alternating boy-girl sequence and could not understand how someone could have 3 boys and no girls. I suspect she may be an alien trying to pass as human and failing miserably. Story 6. I was selling a party tent 20 feet by 20 feet. A random person on the marketplace asked me if it would fit in their backyard. Laughing out loud, I said I didn't know. I've never been to your backyard. Maybe measure to see if you have that space. Another time, while selling a black dress on the marketplace, a woman asked whether it would meet the dress code for her new waitress job at Chili's. How am I supposed to know that, lady? Story 7. It would be really useful if the program could tell you when you have entered the wrong address. Returned mail costs us a lot. We validate addresses against the post office application programming interface so we can be sure we enter only addresses that legitimately exist. No, I know we do that, but sometimes people mistype and enter an address that exists but is not theirs, like getting the number wrong, so we send it to their neighbors. How long would it take to add something to prevent that? To check whether the address entered is where you live, the software would need to know your actual address. And if it knew that, it would not need you to enter it. Do you see the chicken and egg problem? Story 8. If there is a deep end and a shallow end, how come the water is flat on top? Story 9. I used to be a whitewater raft guide. There was no end to dumb questions. One was, do the rocks in the river go all the way to the bottom? No. They are those special floating rocks, apparently. Another was, do we get out where we started? Implying the river goes in a circle like an amusement park ride. Story 10. My mother had dementia, and the social worker asked what my relation to her was. Story 11. How did they train all the dinosaurs in the Jurassic Park movies? Story 12. I'm lactose intolerant, so you can't eat eggs. Well, I can't, but that's because I'm also allergic to eggs. Story 13. I worked at Yellowstone National Park in the early 2010s. One of the visitors, a French woman, asked me when the animals would be brought out for people to see. Story 14. I was at Niagara Falls with my British sister-in-law. We were looking at the section of the river where the water goes over the falls. She asked, "Is the water very toxic?" I replied, "No. The Great Lakes are where southern Ontario gets its drinking water. Why would you think it's toxic?" She said, "Well, everyone who falls in the river here dies." I had to explain that they died because they went over the falls. This had never occurred to her. Story 15. Is that your real skin? I think she meant to ask if I had had cosmetic work done, but I was alarmed. No, it is not. It is a backup skin that I carved from a turnip. Story 16. My mother said to me when I was 16, "Why do you want me to buy you tampons if you don't have a hole?" She believed that girls did not have holes, meaning vaginas, until they had sex. She thought that a penis created a vaginal canal when virginity was lost. She thought that by my putting tampons in the cart, I was admitting I was not a virgin. Clarification. When I say vagina, I do not mean she thought there was literally nothing there like a doll. She knew I had a vagina and she knew she had one, but she did not understand the inside of it. She believed there simply wasn't a canal until a penis entered. I also do not mean to imply she had her period the month she got pregnant. I believe she had periods before she became pregnant and probably had no idea where the blood came from. She likely thought it came from the urethra or the anus. My mother was uneducated and did not have parents willing to talk to her about these things. She was taught that she had little value as a woman and was taught to be afraid of men and sex. Story 17. I was often stopped in stores with my children. aged 3 and an infant, and asked, "Are they twins?" Story 18. You think Forrest Gump is still alive? The person who asked this believed Forrest Gump was real. His proof was that he played for Alabama and met the president. Story 19. I was on the phone with an American-based hotel chain, trying to book a hotel in Seoul. The agent was not familiar with the location, so I clarified that it was in Korea. Kansas? No, the country, Korea. Silence while typing. North or South Korea? I refrained from pointing out that an American chain was unlikely to have a location in North Korea. Story 20. Someone asked if my children, then aged 3 and 6, were twins. Story 21. I was working at a by-the-slice pizza place and a woman stared at the pizzas under the heat lamps for a minute or two before asking, "What's the difference between the cheese pizza and the pepperoni pizza?" I replied, "The pepperoni pizza is topped with cheese and pepperoni." After a long pause, she asked, "And what about the cheese pizza?" I composed myself and said, "It just has cheese on it." Another pause. "Just cheese? No sauce?" I said, "All of our pizza has pizza sauce on it, ma'am." She paused again and then left without another word. Edit for clarity. This was 1986, in a mall. It was not a gourmet place, no frills. Same sauce on every pizza, same cheese blend. The pizzas were made off-site, delivered cold, then unwrapped and put in the oven when needed. It was near the end of the day and I was selling off what was left. Those two were the only types remaining in the case. Story 22. My business partner got this one. What are you studying for? The bar exam. Cool. Bartending sounds fun. Story 23. I was at Walmart when a young worker asked about my hat. I told her I had cancer and that chemotherapy had caused me to lose my hair. She looked me square in the eye and asked, "Did you survive?" It took everything in my power not to say, "No, I didn't. I'm actually dead. I'm a ghost." Story 24. Do you curl your hair every day? Why is your hair always curly? I don't know. It grows that way, man. Story 25. At my previous job several years ago, tourists from New York asked if they had to exchange their currency to make purchases in Hawaii. Story 26. My kid once saw a dam on television and asked, "Is that Notre Dame?" Haha, not really. She was just a little kid, but it still makes me laugh to this day, so I thought I would share. Story 27. Someone once asked me if bananas were vegan. Their justification was that maybe they were tested on animals. Huh? Story 28. I work in a restaurant, so I get dumb questions all the time. A few from customers. Is there cheese on a cheeseburger? Do you sell batteries? Are those numbers on the menu the prices? Customer. How many cookies can I get with this gift card? Me. That depends on how much money is on it. Customer. Okay. Well, how many muffins can I get with it? Story 29. I am a teacher who began my career teaching students who are blind. I cannot tell you how many people asked if the children knew sign language. They were not joking. Story 30. What do Jewish people do? This was in response to my comment that Chinese restaurants are closed on Thanksgiving. Story 31. I have a conjoined toe. The usual stupid question is, does that make you swim faster? They are conjoined, not webbed. An even worse question came up when I was staying in the trailer park where my dad lived. One of the girls saw my foot and asked, "Did you try pouring hot water on it?" Story 32. I was planning a vendor event, and a sales representative called to ask whether the flyer meant that an 8-foot table would be provided per vendor or that vendors would share a single table. Story 33. Someone asked me why medium blizzards cost more than small ones when I worked at Dairy Queen. Story 34. 2 stories for the price of 1. Story 1. The chicken. Many years ago, while I was working in the meat and seafood department on about my 10th day, a middle-aged man came to the counter and asked for recipe suggestions. I said, "Sure. What protein are you thinking?" He replied with a completely straight face, "I've been wanting to try medium rare chicken. What would go best with that?" I stared blankly for a second and said, "My suggestion is please do not do that." He bought prepackaged chicken instead of the chicken from our meat case. He never returned. I never found out whether he made it through that meal. Story 2, Bear Woman. About a year after I started at that same meat and seafood department, an elderly woman, probably around 60, came to the counter and asked if we had any roasts cut to a different thickness. I explained that the prepackaged roasts are all cut to the same thickness at our distributor before being sent to stores. I said I could cut a roast by hand, but it would have to be one of our premium cuts because that was all we had on hand to cut, and it would be more expensive. She asked if roasts at another store in the same company would be cut thicker, and I repeated that they are all cut to the same thickness at the distributor and sent to every store. Then she scoffed and said, "Fine. That's really terrible, I can't get my roast. But can you point me to where you have the bear meat?" Shocked and assuming I must have misheard her, I repeated, "The bear meat? Yes, your bear meat. Where is it? I've looked here before but could not find it, so I do not know where you have it set up." I was taken aback and stayed in customer service mode. "We do not sell bear meat," I said. "If I am honest, I have no idea where you would find it, so I cannot suggest an alternative." She scoffed. "What kind of meat department does not even sell bear meat? I'm going somewhere else." I said, "Have a nice day." My boss and I had a good laugh about the bear meat woman. He did not believe me at first that someone had asked for bear meat, but he checked the camera out of curiosity, saw the whole interaction, and was dying of laughter in the office. Story 35. If I took out additional loans from my mortgage servicer on the day I paid off my mortgage and for 2 or 3 days afterward. Not having any loans left to pay off was the entire point. Story 36. After someone bragged that they knew a lot about Catholicism, they asked whether Catholics believe in Jesus. Story 37. I'm a cook at a bar. While someone was reading our food menu, they asked, "French toast. Is that some kind of beer flavor?" Story 38. I once met an American who believed that the farther north you travel, the higher the altitude. He asked me what it was like to drive uphill all the way to Canada. Story 39. I was discussing not owning a car with a coworker. She asked if I had my license. I was actively driving a work vehicle in a job that requires a special license to be hired. When I side-eyed her, she doubled down and said she knew lots of people living in the city who do not have one. Story 40. A well-educated friend stated, "I do not believe in dinosaurs." I replied, "How do you explain all the dinosaur bones they have found?" She had no answer. Story 41. Not me, but one time a man from the United States drove to the west coast of Canada in the summer with his snowboard and asked my grandma at a gas station where the ski hill was. She said, "Sir, there is no snow at this time of year." The American man could not understand how there was no snow in summer. He said, "But this is Canada. Even in winter the last couple of years there has been very little snow." I recall hearing that the Whistler Ski Resort is facing warming winters that could eventually force it to close permanently. Story 42. A drunk white woman on a train asked my friend where he was from. He said Nigeria. She asked, "How did you get here? Do they have planes in Africa?" Story 43. My friends and I were talking about the discovery of atoms when one of them said, "It's amazing. How did they even know they were called atoms?" Silence. Story 44. Do chinchillas poop? My university classmate wanted one as a pet because it was cute. She was 20 years old. After she learned that chinchillas do indeed poop, she no longer wanted one. Story 45. If evolution is real, why are there no cave paintings depicting it? He also asked, if evolution is true, when did humans lose their ability to speak to apes? Both questions were asked in earnest. Story 46. My primary care provider asked why I was wearing a diaper during my appointment. I was wearing it because I had a diaper rash that over-the-counter creams were not helping. I had to remind them that I am incontinent, both urinary and bowel. I think they assumed it was a mistake in my chart because most people my age, 31, do not have incontinence issues. I have struggled with incontinence since I was a toddler. I am lucky to still be able to walk with only some back pain. Incontinence was a small price to pay for still having the ability to walk. Story 47. An old coworker once asked the group whether Paris was in London or the other way around. Story 48. A person from the Deep South once asked me if it was true that we all lived in igloos when I worked at the help desk for international business machines in Canada. They were dead serious. Story 49. People asked whether the very obvious boy and girl twins I cared for were identical. This happened several times. Story 50. When I worked at the zoo, a woman asked me if tigers laid eggs. There were rocks along the waterfall-fed stream that ran through their exhibit. They could be mistaken for large eggs, and the tiger liked to sit on them because they were always cold. Story 51. I am a tax preparer. Many times during interviews, clients ask at what age you stop paying taxes. I tell them it does not depend on age but on life events such as death. Story 52. I am from Alabama. I have been asked, among other things, if I had an outhouse, if I rode a horse instead of driving, if I normally wore shoes when I went places, and if I owned a police dog specifically trained to attack black people. Story 53. In anatomy class, the instructor liked my dissection and told classmates to come have a look. I said, "This is the ductus deferens and this is the testis." A classmate asked, "Is that male or female?" I replied, "How often do you see a testis on a female?" Story 54. Recently, someone on Reddit asked me if I knew who Hitler was because I did not know the name of a murderer from about 15 years ago. Story 55. If I were white, my skin would be very pale, but I have dark hair and eyes. I shrug. Story 56. A concerning number of complete strangers have been asking if I am Jewish lately. I have experienced this regularly since I was a teenager. I have some of the hallmarks, so I understand why people might ask, but it usually comes from someone I know casually after several conversations. When a stranger asks this out of the blue on first meeting, it feels very creepy. Story 57. I've had moments when something obvious, for some reason, didn't click, and I asked some stupid questions. I remember these in particular. This show is set in New York, right? Asked about the television show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Wait, is gravity the same as magnetism? Story 58. The first time I met my close college roommate's husband was at their wedding reception. She lives in Ohio and I live in Texas. Upon introduction, I said it was nice to finally meet him. He asked why I was in a wheelchair. It made for an extremely awkward weekend. I forgot to mention that he also said it was the first time he had ever met someone in a wheelchair. Story 59. Patient. Where are you from? Me, African-American nurse. New Jersey. Patient. But where are your parents from? Me, New Jersey. Patient. Where are your ancestors from? Me, I don't know. They were enslaved, so there is no clear origin. Story 60. I used to work in an amusement park with animals. In the 10 seasons I worked there, the most common question I was asked was whether the animals were real. Story 61. Sitting in my 1957 Volkswagen Beetle. Dude, do you drive this? No. I have been pushing it for the past 20 miles. I am just sitting here taking a break. Story 62. Someone asked me if my snake was an invertebrate, and I had to explain that snakes are 90% vertebrae. Story 63. Wait, your hair is naturally curly? I thought you just curled it every day. This was after being in high school with him for 4 years. Story 64. I went from England to Wales for a week's holiday with my girlfriend at the time. When I said we'd probably pick something up from Tesco, she asked, "Do they have supermarkets in Wales?" Story 65. This has got to be the most entertaining post I have seen in a long time. Story 66. I used to work in the United Kingdom and a colleague was traveling to the United States in early July. I mentioned she would be there for the 4th of July Independence Day, and she asked me who they had gained independence from. Story 67. Will my 3-foot pet ball python escape and try to eat me? Story 68. I had an extremely premature baby at 22 weeks and 2 days. I died during surgery to stop bleeding and to remove the placenta in situ. She had to be intubated. She is now 8 with no lasting problems. She was in hospital for 114 days. I have been left with a lifetime of trauma. People who know me well and know how traumatic it all was still ask me when I am having another baby. I will never have another baby. Story 69. Someone asked when Cinco de Mayo was. I did this. Story 70. I am a respiratory therapist. We had a patient who required increasing amounts of oxygen to maintain oxygen saturation at 90%. We had already placed the patient on a vapotherm and were delivering the maximum the machine can provide, 40 liters per minute of oxygen at 100% fraction of inspired oxygen, and it still was not enough. A resident suggested a Venturi mask. A Venturi mask is a small plastic device that allows titration of the fraction of inspired oxygen using air entrainment while providing flow. It delivers up to 15 liters per minute at 50% fraction of inspired oxygen. He proposed that if 40 liters per minute at 100% fraction of inspired oxygen was not working, perhaps 15 liters per minute at 50% fraction of inspired oxygen might. I stared at him and said I would get a bilevel positive airway pressure machine to provide both positive pressure and high-flow oxygen. He agreed and did not prevent me from helping the patient. Story 71. My boss realized he had messed up the timelines he promised the client, and he asked me if the person I managed could complete 60 hours of work in 32 hours. I laughed. Story 72. When I arrived at my unit in the army, a man started asking me what was wrong with my ears. He insisted my ears looked messed up. As far as I can tell, there is nothing wrong with them. No one had ever mentioned them before that. Story 73. I was a booking agent for a cruise line when a customer asked whether the stairs at the end of the hall on one of the middle decks went up or down. I said they went both up and down. Story 74. I had started a community garden plot with a friend. When plants needed stakes, I took some dead bamboo from the nearby woods. When I say dead, I mean completely brown, hard as nails, with no roots or leaves. She did not want to use it because she thought it would start growing again. You might as well expect a fence post to start growing. I was speechless. Story 75. 1. Is this a good substitute for iceberg lettuce? I hold up a cabbage. 2. Is there actual water in the water towers? 3. A 35-year-old American man asked how you could bike to Alaska, saying you would need a boat. 4. He asked why men have belly buttons if they cannot get pregnant. He believed our belly buttons feed the baby. 5. He was actively watching and engaged in the Super Bowl 2024. I commented about Patrick Mahomes. He asked who Patrick Mahomes was. 6. She asked what was on the potatoes. I said dirt. She replied that she did not want them if they were dirty. I said they come from the ground. Story 76. If your dad is British, why weren't you born with an accent? Story 77. I work on ejection systems for fighter aircraft, specifically the F-16 Fighting Falcon and the F-35 Lightning II. By their nature, these systems cannot be tested beforehand, and they are almost entirely ballistic, that is, explosive in nature. Because of this, our tolerances and margins of error are near zero, since any mistake can lead to an ejection sequence failure and could result in the pilot's death. If there is any doubt about a part's integrity, it is replaced. No discussion. It is swapped out for a perfect replacement, or the jet does not fly. I often have to explain this to maintenance officers who are unfamiliar with our discipline. They often have not dealt with us before and are used to aircraft systems where a question can still be tested or even flown. That led to the following conversation during a morning meeting. Me, the damage to the explosive is out of the allowed limits, so we are going to have to order a new one. The supply department says it will be here in a couple of weeks. My captain, who was less than thrilled with the prospect of reporting this to his boss. How did it get damaged? Me, 8 years of wear and tear. It is unfortunate, but it happens. Nothing we can do about it. Captain, why are you so sure it is bad? Me, the technical data allows the damage to pass inspection if it is isolated to 0.10 inches. We measured it at 0.34 inches. Captain, that does not sound like much. Me, it is not, but per the technical data, it is enough. Captain, can we test it? He was referring to an explosive line that is basically steel-braided detonating cord. Me, only once. The other 10 non-commissioned officers in the production meeting started laughing as the captain realized what he had asked and hung his head. Story 78. A long time ago, while working in retail, someone asked if I worked there. I replied, "No, ma'am. I'm just a mannequin." She sighed and said to herself, "Not again, Stacy. Why do you always end up talking to inanimate objects? You have to stop smoking so much. God." Then she left. I hope Stacy is okay. Story 79. My ex once asked which egg is the one you fry when trying to find the term fried egg. The same ex panicked because we did not change money before traveling to Scotland from England. Carl Pilkington personified. Story 80. A memorable question I overheard. While visiting a national park, I saw two people standing on a stone footbridge over a small stream. One peered down, then jumped into the water. The second shouted, "Is it deep enough?" The question itself wasn't stupid so much as the timing. Story 81. He asked how to take room temperature while holding a thermometer. This was in a chemistry lab. He had spent the past 3 hours measuring the temperatures of liquids. I told him to place the thermometer in the room, which confused him further. Story 82. How are you on the autism spectrum? If you mask well, people will ask strange questions. Story 83. Upon seeing the ceiling of a library completely destroyed by water damage, I asked, "Is it supposed to look like that?" Story 84. Someone asked a friend of mine whether they had German ancestry because their adoptive parents were from Germany, even though the asker knew my friend had been adopted from China. Story 85. I'm from Mexico. A coworker I didn't get along with is from a different Spanish-speaking country. Human Resources said I should go easy on her because medical Spanish is different in every country. Now, anatomy and physiology are universal. Otherwise, we would all call body parts by different terms and confuse what doctors need patients to know across languages. Story 86. Not me, but our rental person at my old job asked whether we had a light that projects darkness. I blinked. They were having a daytime performance in the sanctuary of a church that had skylights. The answer was blackout cloth to cover the skylights. Story 87. I was at a retreat center. At dinner, I went to the kitchen to ask about a vegetarian option. It was a Midwestern meat and potatoes kind of place. The staff member said, "I don't think there is one, but I can ask." She came out a second later and asked, "Do you eat fish?" "I don't," I said. She went back into the kitchen and came out a moment later and asked, "Do you eat chicken?" Story 88. I was born with one arm, the right one, and people often asked me whether I was left or right-handed. I grew tired of answering that question, so I started saying left and let them figure it out. Story 89. I have waist-length deep purple hair. A clerk at the beauty supply store said, "Wow, your hair looks great. Did you dye it that way?" "No, I had a tragic grape juice accident when I was 4, and now it just grows this way." Story 90. I am from the Southern Hemisphere. While I was in Europe, a person asked whether Christmas in my country occurs in June. Story 91. I have a student who is usually quite bright. When I saw she had a low grade, I suggested that she take a second look at the instructions for an assignment she had done poorly on and try again. That night, her mother emailed me. "These directions are totally unclear. Where did my daughter go wrong?" I am not making this up. I replied, "Well, Mrs. Mom, the directions say write a poem." That was literally it. There was only a rubric. Your daughter submitted a picture of a dog. Story 92. Why are you wearing sunglasses? It's like 10 degrees out. Story 93. In high school, I asked, what animal does the potato come from? I thought it was like an egg. Story 94. A ditz I already disliked at work asked me, when does afternoon start? That was my breaker. I looked her straight in the eye and said, after fucking noon. Story 95. I was at a drive-through McDonald's. The person asked if I wanted my order to go. Story 96. I told a 24-year-old girl that I was bisexual, and she asked, "Oh, Is that where you date two people at once? Story 97. One of my coworkers of 2 years recently asked me what her job title was. I guess she was planning to look for employment elsewhere and wanted to know what to search for. Story 98. During an orientation dorm meeting at my university, a woman asked whether quiet hours starting at 9 p.m. meant that the resident assistant would check that every girl was in bed by that time. Story 99. Not me, but my husband, who is a secular Jew, was once asked by a friend in the 1990s if Jews believe in God. He said, yes, they believe in the same God as Christians. But there are people who believe that Jews have horns and tails they are hiding. Just wow. Story 100. Someone I know was talking about going to a music festival in Denver called Decadence. They pronounced it decadence, and I told them that decadence was an actual word. But they would not believe me. Story 101. My wife asked me to call the hot water company to find out why the hot water had run out. Story 102. 2 days ago, March 24, 2024, I was helping a sailor with a pay issue and told her I needed her pay stubs from September, October, and November. She asked whether I meant last year, 2023, or this year, 2024. I told her yes. Story 103. When I told someone I was from New Mexico, they said I did not have an accent and asked when I learned English. I grew up speaking English. New Mexico is part of the United States. Story 104. Wife. What are you doing? Me cutting potatoes for fries. Wife. What are you making? Me French fries. Not the stupidest, but an honorable mention. Story 105. Question. How big is the 10-inch pizza? Answer. 10 inches. Question. How much is in the half-pound of wings? Answer. Half a pound. Question. What does double mimosa mean? Answer. 2 mimosas, twice the usual amount. Story 106. I was out shopping with a friend who was wearing a 6-sided Star of David pendant when a store employee commented that she liked my friend's pentagram necklace. Story 107. Sitting at a bar in Italy drinking espresso, an American woman asked, "So do they also have coffee in Italy?" It took me ages to realize she thought espresso from an espresso machine was entirely different from American real coffee, that is, filter coffee. She did not see it as a differently brewed form of the same base ingredient but as something else entirely. I do not know what she thought it was if she did not believe it came from the coffee bean. She then protested my explanations, saying, "I know what I'm talking about. I was a barista in Los Angeles." Story 108. I recently wrote my Bachelor of Arts thesis about silencing in feminist activism, with a special focus on speaking out about sexual violence. My friend's girlfriend, with whom I am not close, asked me about it. I told her that I think it is important because often these stories are heard but not listened to. She asked whether we already hear enough of that in the media. Story 109. Are you sure Colorado has mountains? I've never heard of them. Story 110. Wait, can you actually peel apples? That was the first time my now boyfriend and I hung out. We started talking about our favorite foods and then about fruit. He said he really likes apples, and I said applesauce is one of my safe foods, but I have a hard time eating raw apples, especially because of the skin, a texture problem. I added, I guess sometimes I can eat apples if I peel and slice them very thin, you know? He looked at me and asked, "What? You peel them?" I stared at him, dumbfounded. You know, like take the skin off. This is a 20-year-old man. There's no way he's never heard of peeling fruit. He stared back for a few seconds and said, "Why would you eat a peeled apple? That's like a circumcised apple." I will never allow him to live that down. Story 111. My niece's mother, my brother-in-law's ex-girlfriend, was about halfway through her pregnancy and asked me, "When I use the bathroom, how do I know if it's my poop or the baby is coming out?" I did not respond right away because I thought she was kidding. She was not. Story 112. I had a representative from Sirius XM satellite radio ask me if I had thought about selling my car so I could afford their service. Story 113. The midwife asked, "Is this your baby?" Story 114. Are your twins identical? Sure, except they look nothing alike. Story 115. While holding the specials menu, a server asked me, "The mushroom melt, is that a burger or a sandwich?" The first three words describing the mushroom melt were "our beef burger." Everyone in the kitchen stopped and exchanged looks for an awkward 20 seconds before I said, "Yes, it is a burger." Story 116. What day of the week is Thanksgiving this year? I was stunned. Story 117. I have a somewhat uncommon first name. A woman asked me if I was related to a certain celebrity with the same name. Story 118. How can you be multiracial? Baby, you're legit white. TikTok influencer. Hell, it's almost as if there isn't a set-in-stone look for multiracial people. Genetics doesn't give a rat's ass about what you think every multiracial person should look like. It's also almost as if you, influencer, don't get to decide what a multiracial person or anyone really should look like. Getting smacked upside the head with that Casper the Friendly Ghost gene, which makes up less than the other three races, doesn't erase the fact that I'm literally multiracial. Story 119. I told one of my roommates, who is also American, that I would be studying in London next semester. She asked if that meant I would need to learn a language. I said it would be nice to know a little of a few languages for travel, aside from the Spanish I already know. Then she asked if I needed to learn the language for classes and asked what language the British accent comes from. French. I stared in disbelief until she realized how dumb the question was, and I said they speak English in England. I think a part of her soul died that day from embarrassment. Story 120. Laughing out loud, I had not thought of this in years. I was managing a B. Dalton bookstore in a big mall. A very well-dressed woman walked in, looked me in the eye, and asked, "Where do you keep the milk?" I replied very calmly, "Against the back wall under poetry." She stared at me for a moment, scanned the store in a puzzled way, and left without a word. My clerks cracked up. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.